Ma'am, I think the bingo hall is 3 blocks down. This is a gun store, not a knitting circle. Derek Sullivan's voice cut through elite arms like a blade through silence, making every head in the store turn toward the doorway. His muscular frame filled the space behind the counter. Green military camo shirt stretched tight across his chest, crew-cut hair catching the fluorescent lights as he smirked at the woman who'd just entered. Sarah Morgan stood in the threshold, her messy high bun of blonde curls catching the afternoon sun streaming through the glass door. At 45, she carried herself with quiet grace despite the visible tremor in her hands as she adjusted the worn canvas bag on her shoulder. Her light gray t-shirt was faded from countless washes, her dark military pants showed their age, and her brown combat boots had seen better days. But it was those hands, shaking with a rhythmic precision that spoke of something deeper than age, that drew every eye in the room. 23 customers scattered throughout Elite Arms, the premier gun store in this small southern town, watched as Sarah took 3 careful steps inside. Her porcelain skin with its scatter of freckles across her high-bridged nose seemed almost luminescent in the harsh lighting. Those captivating blue eyes, though, they held something that made Jake Williams, a grizzled veteran browsing ammunition near the back wall, pause mid-reach. Look at those shaky hands. A man in designer tactical gear laughed from near the rifle display, pointing without shame. Can't even hold a shopping list steady, let alone a firearm. His companion, a younger guy who looked fresh from a corporate gym, chimed in with practiced cruelty. Someone call her grandkids. Bet they're worried sick. The store erupted in scattered laughter. Derek leaned against the glass counter with theatrical leisure, his arms crossed, clearly enjoying the show. Seriously, ma'am, you looking for the pharmacy? Because we don't sell arthritis medication here. Sarah said nothing. She set her canvas bag down with movements that were controlled despite the tremor, straightened her spine, and for just a moment, her feet shifted. Jake Williams caught it, the subtle repositioning, weight distributed perfectly, center of gravity low, feet shoulder-width apart. It was the kind of stance you didn't learn from YouTube videos or weekend classes. That was muscle memory from somewhere else entirely. But Derek missed it. Everyone missed it except Jake, whose weathered fingers had stilled on the ammunition box he'd been examining. Barrett M82A1, CQB variant, Sarah said quietly, her voice cutting through the mockery like a suppressed round through night air. The one with the modified buffer spring. The laughter died for exactly 3 heartbeats. The model she'd just named wasn't in any public catalog. It wasn't supposed to exist outside classified military contracts. Even the designation CQB variant was something that shouldn't be common knowledge. Close quarters battle modification of a 50 caliber anti-material rifle that was, by all official records, just a rumor. Derek's smirk wavered, but he recovered with the resilience of someone who'd never truly been challenged. Oh, wonderful. Grandma watches YouTube. How adorable. He turned to address the growing audience, voice rising with performative confidence. Let me guess, you saw it in a video game? Call of Duty, maybe? More laughter rippled through Elite Arms, but it was thinner now, less certain. Several customers had started recording on their phones, no doubt already crafting captions for social media about the old lady embarrassing herself at the gun store. But Jessica Reynolds, standing near the entrance in her Gucci blazer and 4-inch heels, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, decided to escalate. She clicked forward on those expensive shoes, glossy lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. Honey, Jessica's voice dripped with false sweetness, this really isn't a museum. These weapons are for people who actually know how to use them. She gestured dismissively at Sarah's worn clothing. Maybe try the pawn shop down the street. I'm sure they have some nice antiques more suited to your demographic. Sarah's trembling hand reached up, adjusting wire-rimmed reading glasses that had seen better decades. The movement drew attention to her wrist, and there, barely visible beneath her sleeve, Jake Williams noticed something that made his breath catch. A scar, perfectly circular, old and faded. The kind of mark that spoke its own language to those who knew how to read it. Bullet wound, through and through. The kind that left that specific signature when the round went clean through without fragmenting. Serial number should start with CQB 47, Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the shake in her fingers. Barrel length 20 inches, not the standard 29. Titanium firing pin instead of steel. Magazine modified to hold 7 rounds instead of 10 for better weight distribution. Robert Hayes, the store manager, emerged from the back office at that exact moment, Former Marine, mid-40s, with a buzz cut going gray at the temples, he froze mid-step. Those weren't details you could find online. Those were manufacturer specifications. More than that, they were classified specifications that only someone who'd handled the weapon extensively would know. Derek noticed Robert's reaction, but completely misread the moment. "Hey, Robert," he called out, voice thick with mockery. "We got ourselves a Wikipedia warrior here. Grandma thinks she knows our inventory better than we do." He spun back to Sarah, condescension dripping from every word. "Listen, ma'am, this is a professional establishment. We serve serious shooters, not—" He gestured at her trembling hands with theatrical disgust. "Whatever this is, security. We need to escort this lady out before she has a senior moment and hurts herself." But no security came. Instead, Jake Williams set down the ammunition and moved closer, his eyes locked on Sarah's hands. Not the shake of age, not the tremor of fear. The rhythm was too specific, too patterned. He'd seen this before, in men who had spent too long behind heavy weapons, whose nervous systems had been permanently rewired by sustained combat. "Nerve damage," Jake said quietly, but his voice carried in the sudden tension. "Combat tremor. I've seen it in operators who spent too much time on crew-served weapons. Extended fire does that, rewires your whole nervous system." Derek spun on him, face flushing red. "Oh, perfect. Another wannabe expert. What is this? A convention for delusional people?" He gestured wildly at Sarah. "Next you'll be telling me she's some kind of war hero. Look at her. She probably can't even read the rangefinder, let alone shoot straight." If you've ever watched someone be dismissed because of how they look, judged before they could speak, written off before they could act, then you know exactly how this moment feels. That burning sense of injustice that makes you want to scream, "Wait, just wait." Hit that like button right now, and subscribe because stories like this matter. They remind us that the most dangerous assumptions are the ones we make about people we think we've already figured out. And I'm curious, where are you watching this from? Drop your country in the comments. I love knowing this community spans the whole world, united by these moments of truth. The crowd had split into factions now. Some still laughed along with Derek, feeding off his aggressive energy. Others, particularly the veterans scattered throughout the store, had begun noticing details. The way Sarah hadn't flinched at the hostility, the perfect military bearing hidden beneath casual clothes, the calm in those blue eyes that spoke of someone who'd faced down far worse than a room full of mockery. Sarah moved toward the display case, each step measured despite the tremor. Derek watched her progress, and something else caught his attention. She was cataloging. Her eyes swept the room in a systematic pattern, noting exits, counting people, identifying potential threats. It was subtle, automatic, the kind of awareness that became second nature in certain professions. "Third row," Sarah said, pointing with a shaking finger. "Second from the left. That's the one." Derek laughed, harsh and grating. "Oh, you want the $50,000 rifle? Perfect. Let me get that for someone who can't even sign their name without shaking." He turned back to the crowd. "Robert, you seeing this? We got a comedy show happening here." But Robert wasn't laughing. He stood frozen, staring at the display case, at the exact rifle Sarah had identified. It was their most expensive piece, a weapon that technically shouldn't even be in a civilian store. They kept it as a showpiece, never expecting to actually sell it. The fact that she'd picked it out from among dozens of similar-looking rifles without hesitation was unsettling. 3 more customers entered at that moment, drawn by the commotion visible through the store's large windows. Among them was a young woman with a perfectly styled dark ponytail, designer activewear that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She immediately sensed the entertainment value. "Why do old people always waste everyone's time?" she stage whispered, loud enough for the room to hear. "She probably thinks this is a hardware store." Derek seized the momentum like a predator scenting blood. "You know what? Let's have some fun. Hey, Grandma, you want to see the big bad rifle? Let me show you something you definitely can't afford." He pulled out his keys with theatrical flourish, jangling them mockingly. "Unless you've got your social security check with you." The insult landed hard, drawing cruel laughter from at least a third of the room. Someone's phone camera light came on, another viral video in the making. But Sarah didn't react with anger or embarrassment. Instead, she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out something small and metallic, a challenge coin. Worn smooth from years of handling, its details were hard to make out from a distance. But Robert could see it, and what he saw drained the blood from his face. The unit insignia on that coin belonged to something that had been officially disbanded, its records sealed, its very existence denied by 3 different government agencies. "Just open the case," Sarah said softly. "Please." Derek noticed Robert's reaction, and with the confidence of someone who'd never truly been wrong about anything in his entire life, misinterpreted it completely. "See? Even Robert knows this is ridiculous, probably calling security right now." But Robert wasn't reaching for the phone. He was moving forward, his movements careful, almost reverent, as Derek reluctantly opened the case. The young sales associate kept up his mockery, making jokes about grandma's gun fantasy to his audience. But his voice had taken on a slightly hollow quality. Sarah rolled up her sleeve just enough to reveal what she'd been concealing, a specialized wrist brace that made Derek's eyes narrow with fresh contempt. "Arthritis acting up?" he sneered, not recognizing the sophisticated medical equipment. "Maybe you should invest in some heat patches instead of wasting our time." But what Derek failed to recognize, what most people in that room couldn't possibly identify, was that the brace Sarah wore wasn't from any pharmacy. The carbon fiber construction, the micro-servo stabilizers visible if you knew what to look for, this was advanced medical support equipment. Originally developed by NASA to help astronauts maintain fine motor control in zero gravity, these devices had been adapted for elite operators dealing with nerve damage from combat injuries. The prescription bottle she briefly revealed while adjusting the brace contained military-grade nerve blockers, medication that cost more per dose than most people made in a week. But to Derek and his audience, it was just more evidence of her weakness. The rifle lay on the counter now, its black metal surface gleaming under the shop lights. Sarah reached for it, her hands shaking visibly, and the crowd held its breath. Some expected her to drop it. Others waited for her to struggle with the weight. Derek stood ready with another cutting remark, his smirk firmly in place. Then something extraordinary happened. The moment Sarah's trembling fingers made contact with the weapon, everything changed. The trembling didn't stop. It couldn't. The nerve damage was permanent, but it shifted. It accommodated. The shake integrated into her grip with a precision that spoke of decades of muscle memory, of a body that had learned to work with its damage rather than against it. She lifted the 30-pound weapon with a single hand, movements flowing like water despite the persistent tremor. "Firing pin spring tension is off by 0.3 millimeters, she said, running her trembling fingers along the mechanism without even looking. Would cause a misfire in cold weather, probably around -15 Celsius. Robert moved closer, pulling out inspection tools with hands that had started to shake for entirely different reasons than Sarah's. He checked the mechanism, his face going progressively paler with each measurement. She was right, down to the exact measurement. That kind of diagnostic ability didn't come from YouTube videos or video games. It came from handling hundreds of weapons in conditions where a misfire meant death. It came from the kind of experience that left permanent marks on your body and in your mind. "Ma'am," Robert started, his voice respectful now, carefully controlled. "Where did you—" "I'm calling the cops," Derek interrupted, pulling out his phone with aggressive certainty. "This is harassment. You can't just come in here and touch merchandise you can't afford. I'm reporting this as attempted theft." The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement, others looking uncertain. The young woman in designer activewear was live streaming now, her voice carrying across the store as she narrated to her followers. "Okay, family, you're not going to believe this. Some old lady with shaky hands thinks she's some kind of gun expert. This is getting so cringe. Someone should check if she escaped from a care facility." Sarah set the rifle down gently, her hands still trembling, movements still precise. She looked directly at Derek, and for the first time, she allowed herself the smallest smile. Just a slight curve of her lips, but it held something that made Jake Williams take an involuntary step forward. "Please do call them," Sarah said quietly. "Ask for Captain Morrison. Tell him Sarah Morgan says hello." The name drop had an immediate effect on Jake, who actually stumbled backward as if physically struck. "Morgan," he whispered. "Sarah Morgan, from the 212th? Derek ignored him, already dialing. "Yeah, 911. I need to report a disturbance at Elite Arms. We have an elderly woman here who's harassing customers and staff, possibly mentally unstable. She's—" But while Derek continued his exaggerated report to the emergency dispatcher, Robert had quietly picked up the store's internal phone. His conversation was brief, hushed, but Jake caught fragments. "Need you here, now. No, sir. Right away. Yes, she's here." The security system cameras throughout the store were capturing everything from multiple angles. In the manager's office 3 floors up, banks of monitors showed different views of the unfolding scene. The AI-powered facial recognition software, originally developed for military base protection and adapted for high-end retail security, was running continuous scans. The system, with its encrypted database connection to federal watch lists, had flagged something unusual about Sarah's profile the moment she'd walked through the door. Military-grade surveillance equipment costing more than most luxury cars began cross-referencing her biometric data with classified personnel files that shouldn't even be accessible to civilian systems. But the real revelation came from an unexpected source. Near the corner ammunition display, an older man who had been quietly browsing suddenly straightened. He'd been watching the entire exchange with growing unease. But when Sarah had lifted that rifle, when he had seen the specific way her trembling hands had moved with such practiced precision, recognition had dawned on his weathered face. "Holy cow," he breathed, then louder, his voice cutting through Derek's phone conversation. "QSI 7, you're QSI 7. The store fell absolutely silent. Even Derek paused in his call to 911, confusion crossing his features. QSI 7 wasn't a designation most people would recognize. But Jake Williams did, Robert Hayes did, and judging by the sudden shift in atmosphere, at least a few others in that room understood what those numbers and letters meant. "Quantico sniper instructors," Jake said slowly, as if speaking the words might make them less real. "The ones who train the trainers. The ghosts who don't officially exist." Derek laughed, but it sounded forced now, nervous. "Right, and I'm a Navy SEAL. Come on, people, don't buy into her delusions." She probably heard that in some movie. But Robert was already moving, heading to the back office with quick, purposeful strides. He returned less than a minute later carrying something that made several veterans in the crowd straighten to attention. An old leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. The store's history log, dating back to Elite Arms' founding in 1995. He flipped through pages with practiced efficiency until he found what he was looking for. Without a word, he turned the book around, holding it up for the crowd to see. A photograph, faded but clear enough, a group of instructors at a military ceremony standing in formation, and there, in the center of the front row, a younger woman with the same captivating blue eyes, the same determined set to her jaw, the same sharp nose and porcelain skin. The caption beneath read, "Chief Instructor S. Morgan receiving commendation for training excellence, 1998. "That's impossible," Derek said, but his voice had lost its edge. "That could be anyone. You can't seriously believe—" "Shut your mouth, Derek," the command came from Robert, sharp and final. "Just shut it, for once in your life." The crowd was buzzing now, phones out, recording everything. The narrative had shifted dramatically. What had started as cruel entertainment, watching an old lady embarrass herself, had transformed into something else entirely. But most still didn't fully grasp what was happening. Some thought it was an elaborate prank, a setup for social media. Others sensed something deeper, but couldn't quite place it. Sarah stood quietly through it all, her hands still trembling, her expression calm. She'd been through this before. The disbelief, the mockery, the slow dawning recognition. It never got easier, but she'd learned long ago that the truth didn't need her to defend it. It would defend itself, in time. "One shot," she said quietly, cutting through the noise. "Give me one shot at 500 meters, and then I'll leave." The range was attached to the back of Elite Arms, a point of pride for the establishment. They boasted the longest indoor range in the state, with electronic targets and wind simulation systems for serious long-distance practice. Most commercial ranges topped out at 100 meters. Elite Arms went to 600. Derek scoffed at the suggestion, but his laugh sounded hollow. 500 meters, lady? Olympic shooters struggle at that distance. You can't even hold your hands steady. This is getting pathetic." But Robert was already nodding, his decision made. "Clear the range," he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded men in combat. "Everyone out except essential personnel." "You can't be serious," Derek protested, his confidence cracking. "She could hurt someone. Look at her hands, Robert. I'm calling corporate if you—" "Call whoever you want," Robert said, his tone allowing no argument. "After she takes the shot." The crowd moved like a tide toward the range entrance, their mockery replaced by something between curiosity and disbelief. Jessica Reynolds was narrating breathlessly into her phone, her previous cruelty momentarily forgotten in favor of potential viral content. Okay, so apparently this old lady with shaking hands thinks she can make some impossible shot. This is either going to be amazing or amazingly embarrassing. Someone had set up the target at the far end of the range. Not just any target, but the store's legendary challenge. A challenge coin, silver dollar-sized, suspended on fishing line and swaying slightly in the ventilation current. It was a running joke at Elite Arms. In 3 years, no one had managed to hit it. The best shooters in the state had tried and failed, their pride wounded but their respect for the impossible shot intact. Sarah walked to the firing line, her gait steady despite the tremor. She knelt slowly, acknowledging silently that her knees weren't what they used to be, weren't what they'd been during those 17 hours in Fallujah when kneeling had meant the difference between life and death for 12 Marines. The crowd pressed against the viewing window, phones raised, waiting for the spectacular failure they were certain was coming. But as Sarah settled into position, something shifted in the room's energy. The tremor was still there, visible to everyone, but it seemed to integrate into her stance, becoming part of a larger rhythm rather than fighting against it. She pulled out a pair of worn shooting gloves from her bag, leather cracked but soft, molded to her hands from countless hours of use. The material had memory. It knew these fingers, these palms, this specific pattern of tremor and compensation. "This is insane," Derek muttered, but even he couldn't look away. Sarah took her time with the rifle, adjusting the scope with minute movements. Her breathing slowed, became measured, deliberate. Those who knew what to look for could see it, the way her body aligned with the weapon, creating a perfect triangle of support. The way even her tremor seemed to follow a pattern, a rhythm that wouldn't interfere with the shot because it had been incorporated into the technique itself. Tyler Brooks, one of Derek's regular customers and self-proclaimed gun expert, leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. "I give her zero chance. That coin's basically impossible, even with perfect hands." $5 says she can't even hit the target board," someone else muttered. Jake Williams said nothing. He just watched, his experienced eyes seeing things others missed, the way Sarah had positioned herself, the micro adjustments to her breathing pattern, the way her trembling hands had found their rhythm and settled into it like a key finding its lock. The first shot rang out like thunder in the enclosed space. The coin didn't just move. It rang like a bell struck dead center, the sound echoing across the suddenly silent range. But Sarah wasn't done. She adjusted slightly, her trembling hands somehow steady in their purpose, and fired again. The coin split along its edge, a piece breaking off, tumbling through the air. The silence was deafening. Then, as if choreographed, every phone in the crowd lowered. The live stream commentary stopped. Even Derek's mouth hung open, no sarcastic comment ready. "Third shot," Sarah announced calmly, her voice carrying despite its quietness, "to prove it wasn't luck." This time, she closed her eyes. The remaining piece of the coin disintegrated, leaving only the fishing line swaying gently in the air, testament to what had just occurred. It was impossible. It was magnificent. It was everything they had said she couldn't do, accomplished with hands that shook and eyes they'd mocked as too old to see. Jake Williams was the first to speak, his voice rough with emotion he didn't bother to hide. "In 15 years of competitive shooting, I've never seen anything like that, not with perfect hands. Sure as hell not with combat tremor." The woman who had been live streaming had lowered her phone completely, her face flushed with what might have been shame. The designer-clad crowd that had laughed so readily was silent now, processing what they had witnessed, trying to reconcile the impossibility of it with the evidence before their eyes. Someone in the back whispered, "Did she really just do that with her eyes closed?" But the real shock was yet to come. The sound of rapid footsteps echoed from the stairwell leading down from the executive offices. Heavy, urgent, taking the stairs 3 at a time. Then the range door burst open, and Thomas Bradford entered the room. The CEO of Elite Arms wasn't known for running anywhere. At 6'4" and built like a former linebacker, which he was, he commanded rooms with presence, not urgency. But here he was now, his $1,000 suit disheveled, his face flushed from exertion, his usually perfect hair askew. He took in the scene with a single sweeping glance. Sarah standing at the firing line, the destroyed target, the stunned crowd, and something shifted in his expression, recognition, followed immediately by something that looked almost like fear. Not fear of Sarah, fear of what he'd allowed to happen in his store. "Instructor Morgan," he said, and his voice carried a weight that made everyone turn. Then something incredible happened. Thomas Bradford, CEO of the largest gun retail chain in the Southwest, dropped to one knee in a perfect military genuflection. "Ma'am," he continued, his voice thick with emotion he didn't bother to hide. "Cadet Bradford, class November '98. You saved my life in Kabul." The room erupted. Phones came back up, recording this impossible scene. Derek's face had gone from red to white, his own phone still connected to 911, the operator's voice faintly audible, asking if assistance was still needed. "Sir?" The dispatcher's voice crackled. "Sir, are you still there? Do you need assistance?" But Derek couldn't answer. He could only stare as his boss, knelt before the woman he had been mocking for the past 20 minutes. Sarah looked down at Thomas Bradford, and for the first time since entering the store, her expression softened with something that might have been fondness. "Stand up, Thomas. You know I never liked the formality." But Thomas didn't stand. Instead, he looked around the room, his eyes finding each person who had mocked her, each face that had laughed. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who'd commanded soldiers in combat zones, who'd made life-and-death decisions and lived with the consequences. "This woman," he said, each word deliberate and clear, "is Master Sergeant Sarah Morgan, chief instructor at Quantico Sniper School for 25 years. He paused, letting that sink in. "She trained me. She trained my instructors. She trained the people who trained Navy SEAL Team 6. Another pause, and when he continued, his voice had dropped to something more personal, more painful. "The tremor in her hands. That's nerve damage from pulling 6 wounded Marines out of a burning Humvee in Iraq. 2003. She stayed under fire for 45 minutes, providing cover with a damaged rifle and a separated shoulder. Saved every single one of them." The silence in the room was absolute now. Even the ventilation system seemed to have stopped, as if the building itself was holding its breath. The woman in the designer outfit had tears running down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. The young men who had high-fived over their mockery looked like they wanted to sink into the floor. And Derek finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "But you didn't know," Thomas said, finally standing. "You didn't. You saw an older woman with shaking hands, and you assumed she was weak, assumed she was less than, assumed she didn't belong." He turned to face Derek fully, and there was steel in his expression. "You're fired. Effective immediately. Clear out your locker." "But Mr. Bradford, I didn't stutter, Derek." Thomas's voice cut through the protest like a blade. "You're done. Security will escort you out." Sarah raised one trembling hand. "Thomas, wait. The boy made a mistake. We all do. Maybe—" "No, ma'am." Thomas's voice was firm, respectful, but unyielding. "Respectfully, no. Disrespect has consequences. Judgment based on appearance has consequences. He had 20 chances to show basic human decency and failed every single one." The crowd was shifting now, some people trying to edge toward the exits, others pressing closer as if proximity to Sarah might somehow absolve them of their earlier laughter. Jake Williams had straightened to attention without realizing it, his body responding to decades-old training. Robert still clutched the history book, his knuckles white against the worn leather. One of the young men who'd been filming earlier stepped forward hesitantly, phone forgotten in his pocket. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. My dad served. I should have known better. I should have—" His voice broke. Sarah looked at him with those captivating blue eyes, and despite everything, they held kindness. "What's your name, son?" "Tyler, ma'am. Tyler Rodriguez." "Well, Tyler, you learned something today. That's what matters." She turned to address the room, her voice carrying despite its quietness. "You all have. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who looks the least threatening. Sometimes strength comes wrapped in unexpected packages." Someone in the back called out, voice uncertain. "Were you really at Quantico for 25 years? Thomas answered for her, his voice carrying pride that went beyond professional respect. "Ma'am holds the record for successful training completions. Over 3,000 snipers passed through her courses. She wrote the manual that's still used today, literally wrote the book on long-distance precision shooting." "The tremor?" another voice asked hesitantly, genuinely curious now. "How do you shoot with nerve damage?" This time Sarah answered, and her words carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "You adapt. You learn your body's new rhythm. You make the tremor part of your technique instead of fighting against it. The same way you adapt to wind, to distance, to pressure. A skilled shooter doesn't fight conditions. They flow with them. Jessica Reynolds had moved closer, her phone completely forgotten. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice small, all the earlier cruelty gone. "I said terrible things. I judged you. I don't even know how to apologize enough." "Then don't," Sarah said simply, but not unkindly. "Just do better next time. See people for who they are, not what you assume them to be." The revelations weren't over, though. As the crowd processed what they'd learned, as Derek was escorted out by security, his face a mixture of shock, shame, and growing anger, the story was already spreading beyond the walls of Elite Arms. The live streams, the videos, the photos, all of it was racing across social media at viral speed. Within minutes, hashtags were trending. Veterans across the country were sharing their stories, their memories of the legendary instructor who'd shaped a generation of military marksmen. Photos surfaced on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Sarah in uniform, Sarah training students at Quantico, Sarah receiving commendations. Each image showed the same steady blue eyes, the same determined set to her jaw, the same presence that commanded respect without demanding it. Back in the store, Thomas was still processing his own emotions. "Ma'am, when I saw you on the security feed, the way you held that rifle, I knew. I ran down here as fast as I could, but..." He gestured helplessly at where Derek had been standing. "I'm sorry for how you were treated in my own store. It's unforgivable." Sarah adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses, the tremor in her hands as constant as her calm. "It's not your fault, Thomas. People see what they expect to see. An older woman with shaking hands. They fill in their own story." "But they shouldn't," Jake Williams interjected, moving closer. His voice carried the weight of personal shame. "Ma'am, I served 2 tours in Afghanistan. If I'd been paying attention, really looking, I would have seen it. Your stance, the way you catalog a room, the pattern of your tremor, it all screams trained operative." Robert finally spoke up, his voice careful. "The QSI program was classified, wasn't it? I mean, we've heard rumors, but..." "Some secrets aren't worth keeping," Sarah replied. "Yes, it was classified. Technically still is. But when you train that many people over that many years, word gets out." She paused, and something that might have been amusement flickered across her features. "The Phantom Mother nickname came from my students. Said I could appear anywhere on the range without them hearing me coming." Tyler Rodriguez, the young man who'd apologized earlier, raised his phone hesitantly. "Ma'am, would it be okay if I got a picture with you? My dad would never believe this. He used to tell stories about the ghost instructors at Quantico." Sarah smiled, genuine warmth breaking through her careful composure. "Of course. But first, let me tell you something about your father." As the afternoon wore on, the dynamics in Elite Arms had completely transformed. What had started as cruel mockery had become something else entirely, a masterclass in humility, respect, and the danger of assumptions. The security footage, being reviewed and archived in the back office, would later show the exact moment when recognition dawned and superiority crumbled into shame. Derek, meanwhile, sat in his car in the parking lot, watching his phone explode with notifications. The videos were everywhere, his face, his words, his cruelty, all preserved in digital perpetuity. Job offers he'd been considering were already being rescinded. His girlfriend had texted asking if the horrible guy in the viral video was really him. Friends were distancing themselves with the speed of self-preservation. He'd thought himself superior because of his youth, his steady hands, his position behind that counter. He'd seen surface details and built an entire narrative around them, never considering what might lie beneath. Now, as his carefully constructed life began to crumble, he was learning what Sarah had tried to teach with Mercy, that actions have consequences, that respect must be universal, not conditional. Inside Elite Arms, Sarah was surrounded by people eager to make amends, to hear her stories, to learn from someone they'd dismissed minutes before. But she wasn't interested in a fan club or hero worship. Instead, she did what she'd always done. She taught. Your current financial portfolio might be sitting on outdated strategies that worked in past decades, but fail in today's volatile markets. Professional wealth management firms now utilize advanced algorithmic trading platforms and real-time risk assessment tools originally developed for institutional investors. These sophisticated financial planning systems can optimize asset allocation across multiple investment vehicles while maintaining the flexibility to respond to market fluctuations within milliseconds. Comprehensive insurance frameworks designed for high net worth individuals provide layered protection strategies that traditional policies simply cannot match, especially when integrated with estate planning and tax optimization protocols that maximize wealth preservation across generations. "Who here has actually fired at distance?" Sarah asked, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. Several hands went up, including Jake's and Robert's. "Good. Let's go back to the range. I'll show you how to read wind patterns in an indoor environment." "Wait," someone said, confused. "Wind patterns? Indoors?" Sarah's smile held wisdom earned through years of precision work. "Everything affects a bullet's flight. The trick is knowing what to look for." As the group moved toward the range, Thomas pulled Robert aside, his voice low but urgent. "I want her story on our wall, full display, and I want a new policy implemented immediately. Anyone who shows disrespect to a customer based on appearance is gone. No warnings, no second chances." Robert nodded, but his attention was on Sarah, who was now demonstrating grip techniques that accommodated various physical limitations. "You know what gets me?" he said quietly. She could have shut Derek down immediately, could have thrown her credentials in his face from the start, but she didn't. "That's not her style," Thomas replied, something like regret in his voice. "Never was at Quantico. She used to let cocky recruits underestimate her. Said the lesson hit harder when they figured it out themselves. Guess some things don't change." As the afternoon sun slanted through Elite Arms' windows, casting long shadows across the floor, the aftermath continued to ripple outward. The videos had gone beyond viral. They were becoming a cultural moment. News outlets were picking up the story. Veterans organizations were sharing it. The phrase, "Don't judge a book by its cover," was being replaced with, "Remember the Phantom Mother." But for Sarah Morgan, standing at the range and quietly instructing a group of humbled shooters, it was just another day of doing what she'd always done, teaching, adapting, and proving that true strength has nothing to do with steady hands or youthful appearance. The tremor in her hands never stopped, but then again, neither did she. As the range session continued, more stories began to emerge. Each person Sarah corrected, each technique she demonstrated, seemed to unlock another memory from someone in the crowd. A middle-aged woman who ran a training academy in Houston tearfully admitted she'd been one of Sarah's students in 2003, right before the Iraq incident. "You told me I wasn't cut out for field work," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "I was so angry at the time, so angry. But you were right. You saved my life by keeping me stateside. I became an instructor instead, and I've trained hundreds of officers using your methods." Sarah adjusted the woman's stance slightly, her trembling hands surprisingly gentle despite their constant motion. "Catherine Miller," she said, recognition clear in her voice. "Exceptional technical skills, but you froze under pressure. Your talent was in teaching, not combat. I'm glad you found your path." The afternoon was wearing on, but no one wanted to leave. Even customers who had come in for simple purchases found themselves drawn into the impromptu masterclass. Thomas had officially closed the store to new customers, but those inside were witnessing something extraordinary, a living legend sharing knowledge that most people only read about in classified reports. "The thing about tremors," Sarah explained to a young competitive shooter who was struggling with her own nerve issues, "is that they follow patterns. Watch." She held out her hand, letting everyone see the rhythmic shaking. Every 4.7 seconds, there's a pause. Microscopic, but it's there. That's when you squeeze the trigger. She demonstrated with a dry fire. Even without ammunition, the precision of her timing was evident. The young woman tried it, failed, tried again. On the fourth attempt, her face lit up with understanding. "I felt it," she breathed. "The pause." "Your body knows more than your mind realizes," Sarah said. "Trust it." Meanwhile, the outside world was reacting to the viral videos with increasing intensity. Military forums exploded with confirmations and stories. A retired general posted a photo from '95 showing Sarah standing next to a group of Navy SEALs she'd trained. Another veteran shared a handwritten note she'd sent him after he had lost his trigger finger in combat, detailing adaptations that allowed him to return to active duty. But it wasn't all positive. Derek, still sitting in his car, had started posting his own version of events, claiming he'd been set up, that it was all a publicity stunt. His posts gained some traction among certain circles, people eager to believe that viral justice was staged, that the world wasn't really this unfair and then suddenly fair. This narrative might have gained momentum, if not for what happened next. 3 black SUVs pulled into the Elite Arms parking lot, their arrival swift and coordinated. Men and women in crisp uniforms emerged, their bearing unmistakably military. Leading them was a woman in her 60s, her steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her rank insignia marking her as a full colonel. She entered the store with purposeful strides, her team flanking her with the precision of people who'd worked together for years. The atmosphere shifted immediately. This wasn't a social visit. Customers instinctively stepped back, creating a path. Thomas started forward, ready to handle whatever official business had arrived at his doorstep. But the colonel walked past him, past everyone, straight to Sarah. "Instructor Morgan," she said formally. Then her composure cracked slightly, revealing something more personal beneath the military bearing. "Sarah, we need to talk." Sarah set down the rifle she'd been demonstrating with, her expression unreadable. "Hello, Patricia. It's been a while." 12 years, Colonel Patricia Hawkins replied, and there was old hurt in her voice alongside the authority. 12 years since you disappeared after the review board cleared you. We looked everywhere." The crowd was frozen now, sensing they were witnessing something beyond their understanding. Thomas quietly ushered people back, giving the 2 women space while keeping everyone close enough to hear. Whatever was happening, it was happening publicly. "I didn't disappear," Sarah said mildly. "I retired. There's a difference." "You retired without notice, without ceremony, without letting any of us say goodbye, or thank you." Patricia's voice carried decades of emotion. "Do you have any idea what your students went through? What I went through? You did fine without me. That's not the point, and you know it." Patricia pulled out a sealed envelope from her jacket. "This has been waiting for you for over a decade. Your final commendation, the one you never let us give you." Sarah didn't take the envelope. "I told you then, I don't need medals for doing my job." "It's not about what you need," Patricia said firmly. "It's about what you earned, what you deserve, what the 3,000+ snipers you trained deserve to see recognized." The tension between them was palpable. Old friends separated by choices in time, by different philosophies about service and recognition. Finally, Patricia set the envelope on the counter and pulled out her phone. "There's something else. The real reason I'm here." She showed Sarah the screen. "This came through official channels an hour ago. Kabul. They're asking for you specifically." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. The tremor in her hands seemed to intensify for just a moment. Kabul was 12 years ago. "Apparently, it's not as finished as we thought." Patricia lowered her voice, though in the quiet store, everyone could still hear. "They found something. Documents. Sarah, this could change everything we thought we knew about Operation Iron Shield." The name meant nothing to most people in the store, but Jake Williams' sharp intake of breath suggested he knew something. Thomas definitely knew. His face had gone pale, one hand reaching out to steady himself against the counter. "The Iron Shield incident," someone whispered. "What's that?" Patricia glanced at them, then back at Sarah. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No," Sarah said simply. "I've had enough of secrets. If they want to drag Kabul back into the light, let's do it in the light." She looked around the room at the faces watching her with a mixture of awe, curiosity, and concern. The casual mask she'd worn all afternoon was gone now, replaced by something harder, more haunted. Kabul, 2012. A joint operation that went wrong. 6 operatives went in. Her voice was steady, but those who knew her could hear the cost of each word. "I was the only one who came out." The silence was absolute. Patricia's team shifted uncomfortably. This was classified information being shared in a room full of civilians with phones, with recording devices, with social media accounts that could spread secrets faster than any official leak. "Sarah," Patricia warned, but there was resignation in her voice. She knew that tone, knew that once Sarah Morgan made a decision, arguments were futile. "What are they going to do, Patricia? Court-martial a 45-year-old woman with nerve damage?" Sarah's smile was sharp, cutting. "The Iron Shield incident, as they so clinically call it, was a failure of intelligence. We were sent to eliminate a terrorist cell. Turned out to be a trap. 6 good people died because someone up the chain wanted to play politics." "That's not..." Patricia started, but Sarah wasn't finished. "Isn't it?" The review board cleared me of wrongdoing, but they never admitted the real failure was theirs. Bad intel, rushed planning, 6 families got folded flags, and I spent 6 months in recovery, learning to shoot again with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Her voice remained steady, but the tremor had worsened, stress making the nerve damage more pronounced. And when I could finally hold a rifle steady enough to teach, that's what I did, for 25 more years. The weight of those words settled over the room like a physical thing. This wasn't just about mockery and redemption anymore. This was about sacrifice that went deeper than anyone had imagined, about costs that couldn't be measured in medals or commendations. The documents they found, Patricia continued carefully, choosing her words with precision, suggest that one of the 6 might have survived. That's why they need you. You're the only one who saw what really happened in that compound. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Lieutenant Davidson's body was never recovered. Exactly. He's dead, Patricia. I saw the explosion. No one could have survived that. The documents suggest otherwise. Photos, recent ones. Someone who looks very much like Lieutenant Marcus Davidson, alive and working with unsavory elements. The crowd was riveted now, their original purpose for being there completely forgotten. This wasn't just about an older woman being disrespected in a gun store anymore. This was about secrets and sacrifice, about shadows from the past, reaching into the present with implications that extended far beyond this room. When do they need an answer? Sarah asked. 48 hours. They're assembling a team, but they want you as advisor, your expertise, your memory of the original mission. Patricia paused, and when she continued, her voice held a weight that made everyone lean forward. Sarah, if Davidson is alive, if he's been out there for 12 years, then he's either a prisoner who needs rescuing or a traitor who needs stopping. Sarah's hands clenched, the tremor momentarily stilled by the force of her grip. Either way, I owe it to the others to find out. Jessica Reynolds, who had been standing near the back trying to make herself invisible, suddenly spoke up. The words came out before she could stop them, tactless but voicing what many were thinking. Wait, are you saying you're going back into the field? At your age, with your hands? It should have been insulting. In any other context, it would have been another mockery to add to the pile. But something in Jessica's voice suggested genuine concern rather than cruelty, a shift that spoke to how completely the afternoon had transformed everyone present. Sarah turned to her, and there was something almost amused in her expression, despite the gravity of the moment. My dear, I've been too old since I was 35. Too old, too female, too short. Too quiet. And yet, here we are. She gestured around the room, encompassing everything that had happened. Age is a number. These tremors are a condition, but experience, training, the ability to see what others miss, those get better with time, not worse. Patricia's phone buzzed. She checked it, and her frown deepened. There's more. The facial recognition from this store's security system triggered something. Not about you, Sarah, about someone else here. The room tensed. Everyone looked around, suddenly suspicious of their neighbors, wondering who among them had drawn the attention of whatever agency Patricia represented. Her team moved subtly into more defensive positions, hands near weapons that had been concealed but were now obviously present. 3 months ago, Patricia continued, her voice taking on an official tone, there was a security breach at a military records facility. Someone accessed files related to the QSI program. We tracked partial facial recognition, but lost the trail. She looked directly at someone in the crowd. Until now, everyone followed her gaze to Tyler Rodriguez, the young man who'd apologized to Sarah earlier, who'd asked for a photo. His face had gone completely white, all color draining, as if someone had opened a valve. I can explain, he stammered, hands raised defensively. Tyler? Sarah's voice was calm but held an edge of concern. What did you do? The young man's voice broke as he spoke. My dad. He trained under you in '97. Roberto Rodriguez. He died last year, and I wanted to know more about his service. The official records were so redacted, so empty. I just wanted to understand who he was, what he did. Tears were running down his face now, genuine anguish clear in every line of his body. I'm sorry. I didn't mean any harm. I just wanted to know my father. Patricia's hand had moved to her sidearm, but Sarah stepped between them, her trembling hands raised in a gesture that was both placating and authoritative. Patricia, stand down. He's a kid looking for his father's story. We've all been there. He broke into classified military records, Sarah. And found what? Training logs? Commendations? Nothing that threatens national security. Sarah turned to Tyler, and her voice softened. Your father was a good man. Excellent marksman, better spotter. He saved 3 lives in Bosnia using techniques I taught him. That's not in the official record, but it's true. Tyler's legs seemed to give out. He sat heavily on a nearby display case, sobbing openly now. He never talked about his service, never told us anything. I just wanted to know who he was beyond Dad. He was a hero, Sarah said simply, and apparently his son inherited his determination, if not his judgment. She looked back at Patricia. Let it go. The boys learned his lesson and no harm was done. Patricia hesitated, then nodded slowly. The breach will need to be documented, but given the circumstances, I think we can avoid pressing charges. The emotional whiplash of the afternoon was taking its toll on everyone present. From mockery to reverence to international intrigue to family drama, it had been a journey no one had expected when they'd walked into Elite Arms expecting to browse firearms and maybe pick up some ammunition. As Patricia's team prepared to leave, taking Tyler's information for follow-up that would be more bureaucratic than punitive, Thomas finally found his voice again. Sarah, whatever you decide about Kabul, know that you have support here. Financial, logistical, whatever you need. Trying to recruit me, Thomas? There was warmth in Sarah's voice now, a lightness that hadn't been there before. Always, he smiled, but then grew serious. You saved my life in Kabul, pulled me out of a burning building while half the Taliban tried to kill us both. I never got to properly thank you for that. You just did. Sarah picked up the envelope Patricia had left, still sealed after 12 years. Sometimes the best thanks is living well. You've done that. The crowd was beginning to disperse now, people heading for exits with stories they'd be telling for years. But before they could fully scatter, Derek chose that moment to return. He burst through the door, his face red with a mixture of anger and humiliation and something that might have been desperation. This is all fake, he shouted, his voice cracking. It's a setup. Actors. Nobody's buying this nonsense. Security moved to intercept him, but Sarah raised a trembling hand. Let him speak. You think I'm stupid? Derek continued, spittle flying. Secret missions? Kabul? Some mystery military drama? This is viral marketing or some reality show garbage. Well, I'm not losing my job over some elaborate prank. He pulled out his phone, showing a screen full of messages, missed calls, notifications that his life was imploding in real time. Look at this. My life is ruined because of your little show. Well, I'm not playing along anymore. He lunged towards Sarah. Whether to grab her or push her, no one was quite sure. But training drilled into muscle memory doesn't fade, even with nerve damage. Sarah sidestepped smoothly, using Derek's momentum against him with minimal effort. He stumbled past her, crashing into a display case with enough force to crack the glass. As he scrambled to his feet, something fell from Sarah's bag. A photograph, old and creased, the kind of image that gets carried for so long it becomes part of you. Derek grabbed it triumphantly, ready to expose whatever prop he'd found, whatever evidence would prove this was all fake. But as he looked at the image, his face changed. The angry red flush drained away, replaced by something between shock and horror. The photograph showed a younger Sarah in full military dress, standing with 5 other operatives in front of a transport vehicle. The quality was poor, clearly taken in haste with whatever camera had been available, but the details were unmistakable. Combat gear, weapons, and in the background, partially visible, a sign in both English and Pashto. Kabul, December 2012, Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness. 3 hours before the mission. Lieutenant Davidson took that photo, said we needed something to remember the moment by. Her voice caught slightly. He was right, just not in the way he meant. Derek's hands shook as he held the photograph, not with nerve damage, but with the trembling of someone whose entire worldview was collapsing. This wasn't a prop. The wear patterns, the fading, the way the edges were soft from years of handling, this was real, more real than anything his conspiracy theories could explain away. He looked up at Sarah, then around at the crowd, at Thomas, at Patricia's team in their crisp uniforms. Oh God, this is all real. Reality often is harder to believe than fiction, Sarah said, taking the photo back gently. Her trembling fingers traced the faces of people who'd been alive in that moment, full of hope and purpose and trust in intelligence that would fail them. That's why we tell ourselves stories. They're simpler than the truth. Derek sank to his knees, all fight gone. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I couldn't. Get up, Sarah said, not unkindly. Men don't kneel unless they're proposing or praying, and you're doing neither. She helped him to his feet, her trembling hands surprisingly strong, despite their constant motion. You're young. Young people make mistakes. The question is what you do next. I don't know what to do. My career is over. Everything I worked for. Is it? Sarah studied him with those steady blue eyes. Or is this just the end of who you thought you were? I've reinvented myself 3 times in my life. Military operator, instructor, civilian. Each transition was brutal. Each one taught me something new. Patricia cleared her throat. Sarah, we really need to go. The Kabul briefing can wait 5 more minutes. Sarah turned back to Derek. You have 2 choices. Let this destroy you or let it reshape you. I can't make that choice for you. Derek wiped his face, looking lost in a way that made him seem much younger than his 25 years. How do I come back from this? Everyone's seen what I did. By doing better, publicly, consistently, without expecting forgiveness or praise. She paused, and something that might have been compassion crossed her features. There's a veteran center downtown. People who understand what it's like to be humbled might be a good place to start. As the afternoon shadows lengthened across Elite Arms' polished floors, the store began its final emptying. Patricia's team escorted Tyler out for further questioning, though Sarah's intervention had likely saved him from serious charges. The remaining customers trickled away, each carrying their piece of the day's extraordinary events, their perspectives forever altered. Thomas walked Sarah to the door, where Patricia waited with a government sedan, its engine already running. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, and somewhere in the distance a siren wailed, maybe an ambulance, maybe police responding to some other crisis in a world that never stopped producing them. You know you don't have to do this, right? Thomas said. Kabul, the mission. You've already given enough. Have I? Sarah looked at the photograph still in her hand, at the faces of people who had trusted her to lead them, to bring them home. If Davidson is alive, if he's been out there all this time, I need to know why. The families of the others deserve that much. And if it's a trap, if someone's using his image to draw you out, Sarah's smile held no humor, just a cold certainty that came from decades of surviving impossible situations. Then they're about to learn why I was the one who survived Kabul in the first place. Despite the tremor in her hands, there was steel in her voice, the kind of steel that had kept her alive through 17 hours of combat, through 6 months of painful rehabilitation, through 25 years of teaching others to survive what she'd barely survived herself. Patricia opened the sedan door. The briefing is in 6 hours. We'll have everything ready by then. Sarah nodded, then paused. She looked back at Elite Arms, at Thomas standing in the doorway, at the place where she'd been mocked and then revealed, where assumptions had died and truth had won, however temporarily. You know, she said, I came here for a simple scope adjustment. Thought it would take 20 minutes. Thomas managed a smile. Fate has a sense of humor. Or a sense of drama. She climbed into the sedan, but before Patricia could close the door, Sarah rolled down the window. Thomas, that policy change you mentioned about respecting all customers, make sure it sticks. Not everyone has a story like mine, but everyone has a story. The sedan pulled away, dust kicking up behind it, in a cloud that obscured Sarah from view. Thomas stood watching until the vehicle had disappeared completely down the access road, taking with it a legend who had walked into his store looking for equipment and left having taught everyone there a lesson that wouldn't be forgotten. Inside Elite Arms, Robert was already working on the new display for their Wall of Legends, a section that would feature Sarah's story, complete with that faded photograph from Kabul, the challenge coin she'd shown, and documentation of the afternoon's events that would serve as permanent reminder about the danger of assumptions. The security footage would be reviewed, edited, cleared with appropriate authorities, and used for training purposes. A permanent testament to what happened when you judge someone by their trembling hands and forget to see the steel beneath. Derek stood alone in the parking lot, watching the sedan disappear. His phone buzzed with another notification, another piece of his old life crumbling. His social media was a wasteland of criticism and outrage. His name was being shared with never hire this person warnings. Everything he had built through confidence and cruelty was burning down in real time. But, for the first time since the confrontation began, he wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about a woman with trembling hands who could have destroyed him completely, could have let Patricia's team haul him away in handcuffs, could have pressed charges for assault when he'd lunged at her, could have used her obvious influence to ensure he never worked anywhere again. Instead, she'd offered him a path forward. He pulled up the address for the Veterans Center on his phone. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he'd start becoming someone different, someone better. Whether that would be enough to redeem him was unclear, but it was at least a direction, a purpose beyond the wreckage of who he'd been. As the sun set over the small southern town, casting elite arms in amber light that made the building look almost sacred, the ripples of Sarah Morgan's afternoon continued spreading outward. Social media carried her story across continents, reaching veterans in small towns and major cities, reminding them of the instructor who had shaped their skills and, in many cases, saved their lives with the precision she'd demanded. The hashtag that had started as mockery had evolved into something else, a rallying cry for the underestimated, the dismissed, the judged. Remember the Phantom Mother became shorthand for looking deeper, for questioning assumptions, for understanding that strength came in unexpected forms. But in the back of that government sedan, heading toward a briefing that would pull her back into a world she'd tried to leave behind, Sarah Morgan wasn't thinking about social media or viral fame or the lessons others had learned. She was thinking about Lieutenant Marcus Davidson, about the way his body had flown backward from the explosion, about the certainty she'd felt that no one could survive that kind of blast. If the documents Patricia mentioned were real, if Davidson was alive, then everything Sarah thought she knew about that day, about those 17 hours, about why 5 people died and she lived, might be wrong. Her phone sitting in her lap buzzed with an incoming message from an unknown number. She almost didn't check it, almost let it join the growing pile of notifications from people who wanted interviews, statements, confirmation of this story or that rumor. But something made her look. The message was simple, just 7 words. Kabul remembers. The question is, do you? Sarah stared at the screen, her trembling fingers hovering over the delete button. Then she lowered the phone, deleted the message, but the words stayed with her, echoing with implications that made even her steady nerves feel exposed. Someone knew she was coming, someone who had been waiting 12 years for this moment. Patricia glanced back from the front seat. Everything okay? Just ghosts, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite everything. They never rest easy, do they? No, Patricia agreed quietly. They don't. As the sedan merged onto the highway, heading toward classified briefings and impossible decisions, Sarah closed her eyes and let her mind drift back to Kabul, to that cold December night when everything went wrong. The leather seat beneath her carried the subtle scent of government efficiency, cleaning products that couldn't quite mask years of tension and secrets. Her trembling fingers found the worn edge of the photograph still in her pocket, and she didn't need to look at it to see every detail. Davidson's face came back to her with painful clarity. Young and confident, snowflakes catching in his dark hair as he had promised they'd all make it home for Christmas. She could still hear his laugh, the way it had echoed in their temporary shelter before the mission briefing, before everything had gone to hell. Lieutenant Sarah Morgan, as she'd been then, had led them into that compound with intelligence that was supposed to be solid. 6 operators, elite training, clear objectives. What they found instead was an ambush so perfectly orchestrated that she'd spent 12 years wondering how the enemy could have known exactly where they'd be, exactly when they'd arrive. The tremor in her hands intensified as the memory sharpened. She could still smell the smoke, still feel the heat from the explosion that should have killed her too, still heard the screaming that had cut off too suddenly, leaving only the sound of her own ragged breathing and the distant echo of gunfire. 5 body bags. 5 families destroyed. 5 funerals where she'd stood in dress uniform, accepting condolences while her hands were still bandaged, while the tremor was still new and shocking. A constant reminder of what she'd survived and they hadn't. If Davidson was alive, if he'd been out there for 12 years, the implications were staggering. Either he'd been captured, held somewhere she hadn't been able to reach, tortured for information while she'd given up looking, or something worse. Something that would mean the enemy hadn't just known where they'd be, they'd had help from inside. Sarah opened her eyes, staring out at the highway lights beginning to flicker on as dusk settled. The world outside the sedan seemed peaceful, normal, full of people, going about their evening routines without any idea of the shadows that moved beneath the surface of their safe, ordered lives. But Sarah knew better. She'd spent her entire adult life in those shadows, first as an operator, then as an instructor teaching others to survive them. The tremor in her hands was permanent proof that some shadows left marks you carried forever. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Against her better judgment, she checked it. This message was different. Iron Shield wasn't about terrorists. Ask Patricia what they were really protecting. Sarah's blood turned cold. She looked up at Patricia's reflection in the rearview mirror, saw the careful way the colonel's eyes were fixed on the road ahead, the tension in her shoulders that spoke of knowledge held too long. "Patricia," Sarah said quietly, "what aren't you telling me about Kabul?" The sedan's engine hummed in the silence that followed. Somewhere ahead, answers waited. Behind them, Elite Arms stood transformed, a monument to the danger of assumptions and the power of hidden truth. But Sarah Morgan's story, the real story, the one that had started 12 years ago in a compound in Kabul and somehow led her to a gun store in a small southern town, was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning again. Patricia's hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles going white against the black leather. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap. Finally, she pulled the sedan off the highway onto a rural access road, killing the engine in a grove of trees where darkness had already settled. "Get out," Patricia said quietly. Sarah stepped onto gravel that crunched beneath her combat boots, the cool evening air carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Patricia dismissed her team with a gesture, and the two women stood alone as the SUVs pulled away, leaving them in near total darkness, broken only by the sedan's running lights. "Iron Shield," Patricia began, her voice carrying the weight of 12 years of buried truth, was never about eliminating a terrorist cell. It was about recovering stolen weapons-grade plutonium that went missing from a Pakistani facility. The terrorists were secondary, convenient cover for what was really a nuclear retrieval operation. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet, though nothing physical had moved. "You sent us in blind, 6 operators hunting terrorists while the real objective was classified above your clearance level." "Yes." Patricia's voice held regret, but also something harder. "The intelligence community made a call. Keep the nuclear angle compartmentalized. Tell the team it was a standard counterterrorism op. Davidson was the only one who knew the truth, because he had the technical expertise to identify the material. So, when everything went wrong," Sarah's trembling hands clenched into fists, "when my team died in that compound, the explosion that killed them also vaporized the plutonium, turned it into radioactive dust that scattered across half of Kabul province." Patricia met Sarah's eyes. "That's why your hands shake, Sarah. It's not just nerve damage from combat. It's low-level radiation exposure. The tremor is your body's permanent record of being in the blast radius when 3 kilograms of weapons-grade material went critical." The revelation hit like a physical blow. 12 years of physical therapy, of adapting to what she'd thought was combat injury, of building her entire teaching methodology around compensating for nerve damage that was actually radiation poisoning. "The medical treatments," Sarah said slowly, "the specialized medications, the NASA-designed brace, those weren't for combat injuries. They were for keeping you functional despite cellular damage that should have killed you." Patricia pulled out a tablet, showing medical scans Sarah had never been cleared to see. "You absorbed enough radiation to be fatal. The only reason you're alive is because you were wearing prototype armor that diverted most of the exposure. But what did get through?" She gestured at Sarah's trembling hands. "Your nervous system has been fighting a losing battle ever since." The advanced pharmaceutical treatments Sarah had been receiving weren't available through standard medical channels. They required specialized compounding from laboratories that work exclusively with radiation exposure cases. These cutting-edge therapeutic protocols, developed through decades of research into Chernobyl survivors and atomic veterans, combined cellular regeneration techniques with neural pathway reconstruction. The comprehensive treatment program, costing well into 6 figures annually, represented the government's silent acknowledgement of what they'd never officially admit, that they'd sent operators into a nuclear disaster without proper warning or protection. Sarah stared at her hands, watching them shake with new understanding. Every tremor was a reminder of plutonium that had vaporized in her presence, of atoms splitting and releasing energy that had rewritten her DNA in ways medicine could only partially repair. "And Davidson?" she asked, her voice deadly calm. "The photos we have show him alive, yes, but Sarah—" Patricia hesitated. "He was never in that compound. He was extracted 72 hours before the operation. Pulled by someone with authority high enough that I only found out about it 6 months ago when old files were declassified." The implications crashed over Sarah like a wave. Someone knew it was a trap, knew the plutonium would go critical. They pulled Davidson out and left the rest of us to die. Or to serve as witnesses who could never speak because you'd be dead. Or, in your case, too damaged to be credible. Patricia's anger matched Sarah's own. Davidson's extraction order came from Pentagon level. Someone wanted that plutonium destroyed and was willing to sacrifice an entire team to make it happen. Who? That's what the Kabul briefing is really about. New evidence suggests Davidson didn't go quietly into protective custody. He's been running his own investigation for 12 years, trying to expose whoever gave that extraction order. And 3 days ago, he reached out through back channels. He wants to meet, with you specifically. Sarah processed this, her tactical mind already working through scenarios. It's a trap, almost certainly. But if there's even a chance he's telling the truth, then we finally get answers about who sacrificed your team. Patricia leaned against the sedan. "I'm sorry, Sarah. Sorry for all of it. For sending you in blind, for the cover-up afterward, for letting you think your hands shake because of combat stress when we knew it was radiation exposure." The apology hung between them, insufficient and necessary in equal measure. Sarah looked down at her trembling hands, hands that had pulled 6 Marines from a burning Humvee in Iraq, hands that had trained 3,000 snipers to precision excellence, hands that carried the invisible weight of plutonium atoms still degrading in her nervous system. "When do we leave for Kabul?" she asked. 48 hours, but Sarah, you should know, this isn't official. No government sanction, no backup if things go wrong. Davidson's message specifically said he'd only appear if you came alone. "Then I go alone." Patricia nodded, having expected nothing less. "The briefing will cover logistics, known threats, extraction protocols, if everything falls apart." She paused. "There's one more thing. The documents Davidson sent to prove his identity included a photo from that night right before the explosion." She showed Sarah the image on her tablet, 6 operators in combat gear, standing in what should have been their staging area, but something was wrong. Sarah's tactical eye caught it immediately. The shadows fell in the wrong direction. The timestamp was off by 3 hours, and in the background, barely visible, was equipment that shouldn't have been there. "This photo was staged," Sarah said. "After the fact. Someone created a false record of us being in position when we weren't." "Exactly, which means the official timeline is a lie. The investigation, the review board findings, everything." Sarah's mind raced through implications. If they falsified the documentary evidence, what else did they manipulate? Before Patricia could answer, both their phones buzzed simultaneously. The message was brief, sent from an encrypted relay that would be impossible to trace. "Sarah Morgan, Elite Arms was Phase 1. The gun store wasn't random, it was a test. You passed. See you in Kabul. Ghost 7. Ghost 7, Davidson's operational call sign. He's been watching you," Patricia breathed. "The whole afternoon at Elite Arms was him evaluating whether I was still operational, whether the radiation damage had made me unreliable." Sarah felt a cold fury building. "He turned my humiliation into an audition." Or he was confirming you're still the operator he remembers, still someone who can handle what he needs to tell you. Patricia started the engine. "Either way, we need to get to the briefing. There are people who need to know about this latest contact." As they pulled back onto the highway, Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time, a different number, and the message made her blood run cold. "Instructor Morgan, this is Thomas Bradford. Something you should know about today. The security system caught another face we didn't recognize in the crowd. Former CIA, flagged in our database. He was recording everything. Sending the file now." The attachment loaded slowly, but when it did, Sarah saw a man she recognized from classified briefings years ago. Martin Reese, former Deputy Director of Operations, supposedly retired. But here he was at Elite Arms, watching her performance with what the timestamp showed was particular interest during her shooting demonstration. "Patricia, we have a bigger problem. If you've made it this far, you understand that truth is rarely simple and justice is never guaranteed. Hit that subscribe button because the next part of Sarah's story, the Kabul confrontation, the final answers about who betrayed her team, is coming soon. And if this story moved you, if Sarah's journey from mockery to revelation resonated with your own experiences of being underestimated, drop a comment. Your stories matter. They remind us why we keep fighting for truth even when the cost is devastating. The briefing facility was exactly what Sarah expected, a nondescript office building that housed some of the nation's most closely guarded secrets. She and Patricia were ushered into a conference room where 5 other people waited, their faces familiar from various operations over the years. But it was the man standing at the head of the table who made Sarah's breath catch. General Marcus Wheeler, the same officer who had signed off on Operation Iron Shield 12 years ago, who'd assured her the intelligence was solid, who had stood at 5 funerals and promised the families their loved ones had died heroes. "Master Sergeant Morgan," he said, and his voice held something between respect and fear. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't aware I had a choice, sir." Wheeler had the grace to look uncomfortable. "You don't, but I appreciate your cooperation nonetheless." He gestured to the screens behind him, which flickered to life with satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and one photo that dominated them all. Lieutenant Marcus Davidson, very much alive, standing in what appeared to be a Kabul marketplace. 3 weeks ago, Davidson made contact through channels we'd established for exactly this scenario. He claims to have evidence that Operation Iron Shield was sabotaged from within, that the intelligence failures weren't failures at all, but deliberate misdirection designed to destroy the team and the plutonium simultaneously. "To cover up what?" Sarah asked. Wheeler exchanged glances with the others at the table. "To hide the fact that the plutonium was never stolen from Pakistan. It was being moved as part of a black market sale brokered by someone in our own government. When the deal went bad, they needed a way to make the material disappear along with everyone who knew it existed." The room fell silent as the implications settled. This wasn't just about a failed operation. This was about systematic corruption at the highest levels, about using American operators as expendable pieces in a cover-up that spanned 12 years. "Davidson has names," Wheeler continued. "Dates, transaction records, communications, everything needed to bring down a network that's been operating with impunity since before Iron Shield. But he won't turn over the evidence to anyone except you." "Why me?" "Because you're the only one who survived with your credibility intact. The only witness they couldn't silence or discredit." Wheeler pulled up another image, Sarah at Elite Arms, standing at the firing line with her trembling hands. "And because today you proved you're still operational despite everything they did to you." Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. "Elite Arms wasn't random. You knew I'd go there. Thomas Bradford is one of ours. Has been since you saved his life in Kabul. When we learned Davidson wanted to make contact, we needed a way to verify you were still capable of field work." Wheeler had the decency to look ashamed. The whole afternoon was staged. Derek, the other antagonists, they were given very specific instructions to push you, test your control, see if the radiation damage had compromised your operational effectiveness. "Derek was an actor?" Sarah's voice was dangerously quiet. "Derek was exactly what he appeared to be, an arrogant fool who took the assignment too far. We told him to be dismissive, to create pressure. He turned it into cruelty." Wheeler pulled up more footage. But the others in the crowd, the veteran who recognized your designation, the store manager with the history book, even Jessica Reynolds, they were all part of the evaluation. Advanced Corporate Crisis Management Services now employ former intelligence operatives to handle sensitive situations that traditional PR firms cannot address. These specialized consulting groups utilize proprietary background investigation tools and strategic communication frameworks developed for government black operations. When reputation threats emerge from past classified activities or hidden connections, only firms with clearance levels matching the original operations can effectively contain the damage while maintaining plausible deniability across all stakeholder groups. Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You turned my humiliation into a performance review, used real civilians as witnesses to my degradation, because you needed to verify I could still function under pressure. We needed to know if you could handle Kabul," Wheeler said. "If the Sarah Morgan who survived Iron Shield was still there beneath the tremor and the years of teaching. And now you know." "Yes." He met her eyes without flinching. "You're still the best operator I've ever worked with. still capable of impossible shots with damaged hands, still able to maintain cover under hostile interrogation, still willing to sacrifice for the truth. Patricia spoke up from beside Sarah. The Kabul meet is in 60 hours. Davidson will be at coordinates we've verified as strategically neutral. He's promised proof of everything. The original sale documents, the extraction order that pulled him from the operation, communications showing who orchestrated the cover-up. He's also promised to disappear if anyone except Sarah makes the approach, Wheeler added. No backup teams, no satellite surveillance, no contingency extraction. You go in alone, or we get nothing. Sarah looked at the screens, at Davidson's photo, at the evidence of 12 years of deception. Then she looked down at her trembling hands, at the visible proof of what had been done to her in service of someone's greed and fear. I want one thing in return, she said quietly. Complete operational autonomy. No restrictions, no oversight, no after-action review. When I come back with the truth, I decide how it gets used. Wheeler hesitated. Those are my terms. I've spent 12 years living with the consequences of someone else's decisions. If I'm risking my life to expose this, I control what happens with the information. The general looked at the others, saw reluctant agreement in their faces. Done, but Sarah, understand, the people behind this have spent 12 years covering their tracks. They've killed to protect this secret. They won't hesitate to kill again. Good, Sarah said, and her smile held no warmth. Neither will I. The next 48 hours were a blur of preparation. Equipment checks, route planning, contingency protocols for scenarios ranging from ambush to political complications. Sarah moved through it with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. But underneath, her mind was working through layers of deception and truth. Thomas Bradford called her personally, his voice heavy with guilt. I'm sorry, Sarah. I didn't know they'd push it that far. I thought it would be subtle pressure, not public humiliation. You were following orders, she said, and found she meant it. At least you had the grace to reveal yourself before I found out another way. For what it's worth, watching you handle Derek, handle all of it, it reminded me why I'm alive. Why 12 Marines made it home from that Humvee. You don't break, Sarah. You adapt. After they hung up, Sarah found herself thinking about Elite Arms, about the afternoon that had seemed like random cruelty but was actually orchestrated evaluation. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd gone there to test Thomas's standards, to see if her former student maintained the principles she'd taught. Instead, she'd been the one tested, her own capabilities measured against the person she'd once been. The consequence cascade from Elite Arms continued spreading in ways the architects of the test hadn't anticipated. Derek Sullivan, the real one, not an actor, but a genuine antagonist who'd taken his role too far, had indeed lost everything. But his viral destruction had sparked something unexpected. A nationwide conversation about how veterans were treated, how assumptions about age and ability led to discrimination, how strength was often invisible until circumstances forced it into view. The veteran center he had reluctantly visited became flooded with volunteers, people inspired by Sarah's story to give back to those who'd served. Donations poured in, programs expanded, and Derek found himself surrounded by people who understood humiliation and redemption in ways he'd never imagined. Jessica Reynolds had deleted all her social media, but not out of shame alone. She'd used her platform one final time to post a video apologizing to Sarah, to every veteran she'd dismissed, to everyone she'd judged without understanding. Then she'd enrolled in a program to provide free legal services to veterans navigating disability claims, putting her law degree to work in ways that mattered. The young woman who had live-streamed the event faced different consequences. Her employer, a major tech company, fired her for behavior inconsistent with company values, but 3 veterans organizations offered her jobs instead, recognizing that someone who'd witnessed Sarah's transformation and shared it with the world, even accidentally, had done a service to every underestimated person everywhere. Tyler Rodriguez received a visit from Patricia's team, but instead of prosecution, he was offered something else, a position in military archives, helping families piece together the classified histories of their loved ones. His unauthorized access had revealed a need, a gap between what families deserved to know and what bureaucracy allowed them to discover. The store itself became a pilgrimage site. Veterans from across the country made the journey to stand where Sarah had stood, to see the rebuilt challenge coin display, to read the plaque that now hung on the wall. True strength announces itself quietly. Real heroes walk among us unrecognized. Judge not by appearance, but by character revealed under fire. Thomas Bradford implemented the policy changes with aggressive enforcement. 3 employees were terminated in the first month for showing disrespect to customers based on appearance. The store's reputation transformed from elite exclusivity to respectful inclusivity, and profits actually increased as veterans found a place where they were seen, understood, and valued. But perhaps the most unexpected consequence came from the footage itself. The Department of Defense, recognizing the power of Sarah's story, requested permission to use edited clips in recruiting and training materials. Not to glorify combat, but to illustrate the principle that drove Sarah's entire career. Adapt to your limitations, compensate for your damage, and never let anyone else's assumptions define your capabilities. On the morning Sarah was scheduled to leave for Kabul, Elena Parker, the sympathetic witness from Elite Arms, sent a message that Sarah read twice before responding. Instructor Morgan, I'm a social worker now, but I served 4 years before medical discharge. I watched what happened to you, and I watched what you did with it. You didn't just defend yourself. You taught everyone in that room something about strength they'll never forget. That's what real warriors do. They educate even when they're under attack. Thank you for that lesson. Sarah's response was simple. Keep teaching. The world needs it. As she boarded the military transport that would take her to Kabul, Sarah carried with her not just the equipment and intelligence for the mission, but something else. The weight of everyone who had been watching, learning, transforming because of what had happened at Elite Arms. The plane lifted off into darkness, carrying her toward answers she'd sought for 12 years. Toward Davidson and his evidence, toward the truth about Iron Shield, toward confrontation with whoever had been willing to sacrifice an entire team to hide their crimes. Her hands trembled as she checked her gear one final time. The radiation-induced tremor that had defined her post-combat life, that had become the foundation of her teaching methodology, that had been used to mock her at Elite Arms before revealing her true capabilities. Each shake was a reminder of atoms still decaying in her nervous system, of plutonium that had vaporized and left its mark on her DNA. But it was also proof of adaptation, of a body that had learned to work with its damage rather than against it. The cargo bay was dark except for emergency lighting, the drone of engines providing white noise that made thought easier. Sarah closed her eyes and saw Davidson's face, young and confident, promising they'd all make it home. Then she saw the explosion, the heat that should have killed her, the moment when everything changed. But between those memories, something new emerged. Derek's face as he realized what he'd done, Jessica's tears as she apologized, Thomas kneeling in respect, Tyler learning about his father's heroism, the young shooter discovering how to work with her own tremor. Every consequence, intended or not, had rippled outward from that afternoon. Lives changed, lessons learned, transformation sparked by her decision to endure mockery rather than reveal herself immediately. As the plane crossed into international airspace, Sarah's phone received one final message before communications would be restricted. It was from an unknown number, but she knew who it was before she opened it. The truth you're seeking comes with a price, Sarah. Are you willing to pay it? Because once you know everything, you can't unknow it. You can't pretend the poison only goes so deep. It goes all the way to the top, and exposing it might destroy more than just the guilty. Ghost 7. Sarah typed her response with trembling fingers. I've been paying the price for 12 years. Time someone else shared the cost. The message sent just before they hit the communications blackout zone. Below, the ocean stretched endlessly dark, and above, stars wheeled in patterns that had guided warriors for millennia. Sarah Morgan, the Phantom Mother, the Angel of Fallujah, the woman who had been mocked and revealed in a gun store as part of a test she didn't know she was taking, flew toward the truth that had been denied too long. Her hands would keep shaking. The radiation would keep degrading her nervous system, slowly but inevitably. The tremor would be with her until the end, a permanent record of the day her team died, and she survived with poison in her bones. But she'd learned long ago that some burdens you carried not despite their weight, but because of it, because they reminded you what mattered, who you fought for, why the cost was worth paying. The cargo bay settled into the rhythm of long-distance flight. Sarah closed her eyes again, but this time, she didn't see the past. She saw the future. Davidson's evidence exposing the truth, the conspirators facing justice, the families finally getting answers about how and why their loved ones died. And she saw herself afterward, hands still trembling, body still carrying its radioactive burden, but finally free of the weight of unanswered questions. Whatever waited in Kabul, trap or truth, redemption or reckoning, she would face it the way she'd faced everything else. With damaged hands that had learned to shoot straight, with a body that adapted instead of breaking, with the certainty that came from surviving what should have been fatal. The mission wasn't over. It had never been over. Iron Shield was just a chapter in a longer story, one that had led through fire and radiation and 12 years of teaching and a single afternoon of humiliation that became revelation. And now, finally, she was going to write the ending. The plane droned on through darkness, carrying Sarah Morgan toward answers, toward justice, toward whatever price the truth demanded. Her hands trembled in her lap, steady in their rhythm, unwavering in their purpose. Behind her, Elite Arms stood transformed, a testament to the danger of assumptions and the power of hidden strength. Before her, Kabul waited, with secrets 12 years old and a ghost who promised to reveal them. The only question was whether the truth, when it finally came, would be worth everything it cost to find it. Sarah Morgan smiled in the darkness, her trembling hands folded over the photograph of 6 operators who'd trusted her to lead them home. Whatever the answer, she was about to find out. And this time, she wouldn't be the only one who survived to tell the story. The truth about Iron Shield would emerge not from shadows and classified files, but from the testimony of 2 people who'd been marked by it. One who'd carried the poison in her bones for 12 years, another who'd lived in hiding just as long. Together, they would ensure that the families of 5 fallen operators finally understood their loved ones hadn't died from intelligence failures or bad luck, but from calculated betrayal. The conspirators who'd orchestrated that betrayal had made one critical miscalculation. They'd assumed Sarah Morgan would stay broken, would remain the silent, damaged survivor who posed no threat to their carefully constructed lies. They'd never anticipated that her trembling hands would become weapons of precision, that her apparent weakness would transform into her greatest strength. As the plane carried her toward Kabul, and whatever truth awaited there, Sarah understood something fundamental. Real warriors weren't defined by what they survived, but by what they did with survival. Her story, from that burning compound to Elite Arms to this final confrontation, wasn't about overcoming weakness. It was about weaponizing it.